Thank you, Ms. Barker, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Can I also say on a personal level, it's very good to see the Housing Minister back in her role. And can I, of course, thank my honourable friend, Member for Bermondsey, for not just bringing forward this debate, but also the great work he has been doing together with the Member for Colchester on the all-party parliamentary group, where I have been pleased to attend, I think, 1 or 2 meetings. Ms. Buck, clearly austerity has many faces, but none more damning than the number of people having to live rough on our streets. Across not just our cities, but our towns too, the scenes of people sitting on street corners or lying on sleeping bags, mattresses and in bivouacs is probably the most shameful, visible manifestation of a government that just doesn't care. And you don't have to go far to be made aware of this crisis. As we know, just 2 metres from the entrance to Parliament, we see people trying to survive against the odds. And here we are, Parliament, the supposedly powerful legislative body, yet unable to persuade this government that halving rough sleeping in 5 years or solving the issue by 2027 is not acceptable. The public believe it is wrong, and certainly those of us on these benches agree. And in fact, I think most of us in this room believe that the government is showing neither urgency or ambition in tackling it. Maybe we can persuade them today. In the past year, 2 people from the rough sleeping community within Westminster Tube Station area have died. On each occasion, there follows outrage. The Secretary of State will claim that it is 1 death too many, that collectively we cannot allow this to happen again. That people can die so close to this place would suggest that there is too much easy rhetoric from government and not enough real action dedicated to tackling this humanitarian disaster. To restate the oft-quoted fact, we are the 6th richest nation in the world. Let's be clear and let's be honest. Rough sleeping did not start with the coalition government, but the crisis did. And the 2 governments since have done little to arrest the exponential increase in numbers rough sleeping. Back in 2010, there were 1,768 recorded rough sleeping. Today, according to the 2018 count published recently, the figure stands at just under 4,700, a rise of 3,000 or 165% since 2010. Perhaps surprisingly, my own constituency of Warwick and Leamington has had the highest number across the West Midlands of rough sleepers per head of population. Presently, there are 12 rough sleepers officially recorded by the District Council, although this figure is actually disputed by charity and voluntary workers, and I think in terms of how the public would view it, where they see so many more on our streets every day. In 2017, for record, the figure was 21. One of the primary reasons that we find ourselves in this situation is simply through a basic lack of social housing, as we've heard, an issue that I brought to elevate here through the parliamentary campaign for council housing, and which has a cross-party support. Since 1980, successive governments have failed to deliver enough affordable housing, and in particular, social housing. To put this into focus, in the financial year 2017-18, the government delivered just 6,463 social homes, while nearly 1.2 million people are on waiting lists. By way of example, in my constituency of Warwick and Leamington, the council has accepted housing developments that have under-delivered social and affordable housing. In the period 2010 to 17, on the major housing schemes in the area, only 28% of new homes, against their policy of 40%, have been built that are either social or affordable. This lack of housing stock then results in the council having to take a harsher line because they are essentially rationing housing, which leaves a lot of people in unsustainable situations. However, the crisis is, of course, not just down to lack of housing, as we've heard, although I do believe it's central to the problem, and I will return to this shortly. The government's welfare policies have seen rates for local housing allowances frozen for 5 years since 2016. Now, the LHA doesn't cover rents in over 90% of areas in England. And then there's the added challenge of having to wait 5 weeks for universal credit that has been pushing so many people into arrears. Indeed, it is universal credit that has caused a significant rise in homelessness and rough sleeping. But for so many people who find themselves living on the streets, it is the lack of direct and immediate support to address their complex health and welfare needs that perpetuates this crisis. In the year 2017 to 18, it was mental health needs that were most often cited and the greatest need among those sleeping rough, with 50% of those assessed during that period having a need in this area. Alcohol-related support was the second most prevalent need, at 43%, while 40% of rough sleepers were assessed as having a need for support relating to drug dependency. These needs are compounded by the insecurity of the private rental sector. A significant number of the new rough sleepers, 38%, recorded their last settled accommodation as private rented housing. And specifically, it is no-fault evictions that are one of the leading causes of homelessness. And of course, we all know of cases from our own constituency. You'll forgive me if I can just give you one illustration. A young man in my constituency approached me not so long ago. He's been homeless since October. He resides in a car, has had previous problems with drugs and alcohol, however, he received the support in prison for those issues. But since leaving prison, he's reluctant to go into shared hostel accommodation because he does not want to be exposed to similar behaviours again. However, the local council will not allow him a single room in a hostel. It is not in line with their policy, which is a progression from shared hostel room to single hostel room to supported housing to independent residence. This has resulted in him having to continue sleeping rough because he is adamant he cannot go into a shared hostel. So a year ago, I called for a summit and brought together all the local agencies and the authorities to get together and pose the question about how we could address this issue. The ambition we set was that we would try and resolve and eliminate rough sleeping within a year. And I'm pleased to say that the Council and other organisations seized on that ambition. And just a few months ago, the local council and its housing team opened William Woolsgrave House in Leamington as a direct access hostel, and which now provides around-the-clock accommodation, on-site support and referrals for 22 people all year round. But whilst that is positive stuff, I have to highlight the fact that there have been cases or a situation over recent years where the Labour group on the council have been pressing for a change in the severe weather emergency protocol, where it was that you had to be in a case of 3 consecutive nights of 0 degrees before you would be provided with accommodation. After much pressing and many years later and the insistence of that Labour group, that has now been reduced to 1 year. So what are the solutions? Well, I would stress that more social housing is critical. As we've seen from the evidence and has been made by other individuals here, that in Scandinavia, and particularly in Finland, where there is an absence now of rough sleepers, this can be addressed by a housing-first approach. But then ending the benefits freeze, re-establishing the link between housing benefits and local rents, and reforming universal credit is critical. May I just end with this? A further 600 people died, as we've heard, from homelessness in 2017, up 24% versus 2013. That's almost 2 people every day. At the current rates, many thousands of people will die before this government is defeated. This cannot be acceptable.